All right, so there's a headline. 30 days, 22 billion tokens, and a little bit over 11 grand if this was API pricing. Well, I didn't actually build this to do tokenomics on my own usage. I did this originally with the purpose of what I'll call these like agentic self-reflection loops, where if you're building products or tools where the end consumer is another agent, you need the ability to instrument that and understand what is happening over an extended run, with the ultimate goal of identifying like root causes for failures. And failures could be a human has to intervene, or a failure could be this looped for like 3 or 4 rotations before it progressed. Any of those are considered failures. But point being is, once you can do that root cause classification, you can suggest a fix, and you can ultimately kind of tune this process. To give you a very quick practical example of what that looks like, for my text to CAD solution, the V2 version, I was trying to do kind of a similar level of instrumentation, because this ultimately is a tool that is writing tooling for an agent to ultimately use to take in a human prompt for what they want, generate the syntax that gets rendered into a 3D model, and grade. And so a lot of this didn't actually work out quite the way I wanted. The instrumentation had to be at a lower level, I've learned, to get something meaningful from it. But the whole idea, I think, is solid. Well, I've already built this entire pipeline. I was like, okay, what else can I do with this? And before we actually talk about what else I can do with it, I'm going to quickly say what this does. So I take in 4 different PCs worth of like session and event data. I use I use a number of different like IDE-based AI tools like Windsurf, but I also use Claude Codex, OpenCode, and Pi. So I took all the data from those across these different devices. I standardized it. I then constructed this, what I'll call like a simplified trace run, where I could then shove it through another LLM to do what I'll call like this behavior analysis, and ultimately, like you saw, recommend solutions or enhancements to make the run more successful. Well, once I got all of this data kind of standardized and in a format that I could do analytics on it, I shoved it into an S3 Parquet and ultimately into Databricks. So I told you that the original version didn't work super well for what I was hoping, but there are other benefits. I'll give you an example. If you're not familiar with Pi, you can think of it as a very, very stripped down version of Codex, Claude Code, whatever. And in the case of OpenAI, they actually let you use that same like subscription within the Pi harness. And beyond just like token bloat, there's some really nice hidden benefits in the fact that like Pi is a lot less constrained. What I mean by that is, if you have a request that is maybe different from what the standard system prompt wants, or is maybe more exploratory of different ideas, Pi is more likely to respond in a way that's effective, at least in my experience. And so like you actually do practically notice some of this. And even if you don't care about that, maybe you will care about the fact that like the min tokens is 942 versus almost 11K. And I have barely any tools, right? I have whatever the standard OpenAI system prompt that you can't change without going very deep into the Codex CLI, plus your standard like grep, bash, edit, file, whatever tool calls. And I think I have like 3 or 4 skills. That's it. But even so, right, that's a pretty massive amount of tokens. And if you're curious about Claude Code, well, that is worse. And I will not say that the statements that people have made on Twitter about the default system prompt becoming 24,000 tokens is right. But I will say that if you have a number of tools, number of skills, and when I say tools, those tools are like MCPs, yeah, you can very easily get up to that amount. And I think some of these show it, where like on the latest or some of the newer versions of, where is this, of Claude Code, there is actually very visible bloat and increase in the default token window. And you can see, yeah, this number is like 28K. Well, the reality is that includes a number of tools that I had registered for that use case. And so like the reality is actually quite different. It's fairly similar to what Codex is, plus maybe like 30%. Anyways, point being though is like I can now actually get my own information about what's happening and what the reality is. And I'm not planning to share this actual code for a number of reasons, but the idea is relatively straightforward, and someone who's used Databricks or similar before can probably figure it out pretty quickly. Okay, so I'm going to close out by quickly talking about this number. Frankly, it surprised even me. I knew I like used and abused these coding plans, and to be clear, this is a Claude Max subscription. It's a OpenAI. It's 1.5 OpenAI like Pro subscriptions. I got the second one like partly through this period, and then I maybe spend about like $300 to $400 a month in extra like fast usage because I'm impatient. But this has $0 worth of like claw usage or similar. This is 100% for code. And I know I'm in a unique position because like we're living in a world where all of the ideas that I've had pent up over the past like 2 decades, I can finally actually do. And it's an awesome feeling. And so like you can see like every single day, nonstop, and this goes for another like 6 months before this as well. It's not quite a full year, but point being is like I'm like doing this constantly. I know that I use the models to do things that are not like valuable per se. And what I mean by that is, let's say that I want to understand how a library works. Well, previously I would like read the docs and I would maybe watch a video or two on it. Well, now most of the time I will just have Codex go spin me up a little like focused example problem, and then I'll go read the code to learn how it works. Just because it's so much easier for me to kind of understand and reason about something when it's framed in a way that makes sense to me, and I can kind of play around with it, push the boundaries, and like not just read a doc and say, yeah, this is how it works. I can have the model go read the actual library and then tell me how it works. So I do a lot of that kind of stuff. And so for the sake of the argument, let's pretend that 50% of that is that. And then we can say I am coding 2 times more than most people are. Maybe it's 3 times. That is still a fairly substantial number. And if you assume that companies and people who previously were not using AI as much as they're going to be, once this like diffuses out, pricing aside and whether VCs can continue to fund the labs to subsidize, the infrastructure does not exist. There is going to be a supply crunch, and we're going to start seeing things like the Opus 4.6 fast plan, where it's 9 times the pricing of everything else. And then maybe they'll offer like a dumbed down version of the other models, or one that's extremely slow, or they'll start adding more and more restrictions like we're seeing with Anthropic's models and their plan. All in all, what I would say is if you're currently complaining about the pricing or the restrictions or limitations of these plans, you're in for a fun surprise. So I'll leave it with that. And on that happy note, I'm sure I'll talk to you guys later. See ya.